The sand of the arena in Rome, when the sun stood directly overhead, was raked between the entertainments so that the blood of the morning's beast hunts would not confuse the spectacle to come. In the interval, when most men of standing withdrew to the shaded colonnades to eat, Lucius Annaeus Seneca, tutor to a young emperor and one of the wealthiest men in the empire, wandered by chance into the stands and remained. What he saw there, in that noonday hour that respectable Romans avoided, would follow him for the rest of his life, and would enter, some years later, into the 7th of his letters to Lucilius as a kind of wound he could not stop pressing. He had gone to the games, he tells us, hoping for diversion, hoping for something light. He expected the trained gladiators of the afternoon, or perhaps some clever staged combat with wooden weapons and choreographed feints. What he found instead were the noonday executions, in which condemned men were driven onto the sand without armor, without shield, without any means of defense, and made to kill one another until the last of them was himself dispatched by the sword of a fresh opponent. There was no skill in it. There was no contest in it. There was only slaughter, and the crowd around him, thinning but not empty, was calling for more. We are told that Seneca left that place changed, not because he had witnessed cruelty, for cruelty was not new to any Roman of his station, but because he had felt something move within himself while he sat there. He had felt the crowd enter him. He had come home, he writes, greedier, more ambitious, more given to luxury, and worse than these, more cruel and less humane. He had gone among men, he says, and he came back less a man than he had been. This is the beginning of the 7th letter, and it is the beginning of what we will consider today. The principle Seneca states, and which the whole of that letter is arranged to defend, is the principle of moral contagion. It is the claim that character is not sealed. It is the claim that what surrounds a man enters him, whether he consents to it or not, and that the company one keeps is not a matter of taste or preference, but a matter of moral consequence. Nothing, Seneca writes, is so damaging to good character as the habit of lounging at the games. Vice, he says, creeps in more easily when it comes disguised as pleasure. In the older translation of Gummere, which we shall use throughout this episode, the passage reads in this way: I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more voluptuous, and even more cruel and inhuman, because I have been among human beings. Consider the phrasing. He does not say he has been among criminals. He does not say he has been among a mob. He says he has been among human beings, and precisely this, is what has damaged him. To be among men is already to be exposed. There is no neutral company. There is no gathering of persons that leaves the soul as it found it. Seneca is not, in stating this, offering a novel doctrine. He is drawing on a strand of moral reflection that runs from the earlier Stoics through the Cynics and back into Socratic thought. The idea that one is shaped by one's associations is older than philosophy itself. What Seneca does, and what makes this letter one of the most quoted passages of Roman moral writing, is give the principle a specific, embodied, and terrible illustration. He does not tell us in the abstract that bad company corrupts. He shows us a man of middle age, of settled conviction, of long philosophical training, sitting among a crowd for the length of a single afternoon, and finding, when he stands to leave, that something in him has shifted. If it can happen to Seneca, it can happen to you. The doctrine has several components, and we must lay them out carefully before we proceed. The first is that the direction of moral influence is downward more easily than upward. It is easier, Seneca insists, for the crowd to lower the philosopher than for the philosopher to raise the crowd. This is not a claim about the weakness of virtue. It is a claim about the physics of habit. Vice requires no cultivation. It requires only permission. Virtue requires cultivation constantly, and even then it is fragile. The second is that contagion operates beneath awareness. The man who goes to the games does not decide upon arriving to become cruel. He decides only to watch. But watching is not a neutral act. Attention is formation. What we behold, we come, over time, to resemble. Seneca does not argue this at length in the seventh letter, but the whole architecture of his moral psychology depends upon it. The third is that solitude, though not sufficient for virtue, is a necessary condition for its cultivation. Recede in the ips quantum potes, he writes elsewhere. Withdraw into yourself as much as you can, not to escape the world, but to have some ground of your own, from which the world's incursions can be measured. Now let us consider the man himself, and the circumstances in which he wrote these lines, for the seventh letter was not composed by a young student of philosophy in a quiet garden. It was composed by a man near the end of his life, in a season of forced retirement, under a political shadow that would soon prove fatal. Seneca was born at Cordoba, in the Roman province of Hispania, in the last years before the Common Era. His father, the elder Seneca, was a rhetorician of some reputation, and the family moved to Rome when Lucius was still a small child. He was educated in rhetoric and in philosophy, and he took to the Stoic school under teachers who had themselves studied with the successors of Panaetius and Posidonius. His health was poor from childhood. He suffered from what he describes as a wasting affliction, likely a bronchial disease, and there were years in which he considered ending his own life to escape it. It was, he writes, the thought of his aging father that kept him alive. His public career began under Caligula, who is said to have envied Seneca's rhetorical gifts and to have contemplated killing him, sparing him only because a woman of the court assured the emperor that Seneca was consumptive and would die soon on his own. Under Claudius, he was exiled to the island of Corsica on a charge of adultery with a princess of the imperial house, a charge that most modern historians consider a pretext for a political purge. He spent 8 years on that island. He wrote there. He wrote letters of consolation. He wrote on the shortness of life. He wrote to his mother a work of extraordinary tenderness in which he told her not to grieve his absence, for a philosopher, he said, is at home wherever the mind can think. He was recalled from Corsica by Agrippina, the mother of the future Emperor Nero, and appointed tutor to the boy who would at the age of 16 ascend to the throne. For the first years of Nero's reign, Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Porous effectively governed the empire. It was a period of relative moderation. Taxes were reformed, trials were regulated. The young emperor was restrained, insofar as such a man could be restrained. But Nero grew and Nero changed, and Seneca's influence waned. Agrippina was murdered on her son's orders. Porous died, perhaps of natural causes, perhaps not. Seneca, sensing the ground beneath him giving way, requested permission to retire and to return his vast fortune to the emperor. Nero refused the fortune, but permitted, in effect, the retirement. From that point onward, Seneca lived apart from the court, at his villas, reading, writing, and composing the letters to Lucilius that constitute his most enduring philosophical work. It is in this period, this last period of withdrawal, that the seventh letter was written. Lucilius, the addressee, was a friend of Seneca's, a procurator in Sicily, a man of some literary and philosophical inclination, but not himself a professional philosopher. The letters are addressed to him as instruction, but they are also, one senses, Seneca's own examination of conscience, offered under the cover of correspondence. And here we must acknowledge a difficulty. Seneca, the moralist warning of the corruption of the crowd, had spent his life at the very center of the most corrupting court in the ancient world. Seneca, the Stoic teacher, writing of contempt for wealth, was one of the richest private citizens in the empire. Seneca, the tutor of Nero, had composed the speech in which Nero justified the murder of his own mother to the Senate. The letters to Lucilius are, among other things, the writings of a man who knew, better than any of us, what it meant to have kept bad company. We do not raise this to condemn him. He knew it himself. It is precisely this knowledge, we may suspect, that gives the seventh letter its terrible weight. When he writes that he came home more cruel because he had been among men, he is not speaking as an outsider observing the Roman crowd. He is speaking as a man who had watched himself, over decades, become someone he did not wish to be, in the company of a young emperor whom he could not, in the end, save from himself, or himself from. Now let us look at the letter directly, and at how the principle functions within Seneca's own life. The seventh letter opens with a general warning. You ask me to say what you should consider it particularly important to avoid. My answer is this: a crowd. Nothing more. He does not qualify. He does not say a certain kind of crowd, or a crowd at a certain kind of event. He says a crowd. Then he offers the illustration of the games. I chanced to stop in at a midday show, expecting sport and wit and some relaxation to rest men's eyes from the sight of human blood. Just the opposite was the case. Any fighting before that was as nothing. All trifles were now put aside. It was pure murder. The prisoners, he explains, were driven onto the sand naked, without protection, and the sword strokes fell upon bodies that had no defense. The morning combats, in which trained gladiators fought with armor and shields, seemed to Seneca, in retrospect, almost merciful by comparison. Those men could dodge. Those men could parry. These noonday victims could only die. And here is what he attends to. Not the violence itself, which he does not describe in detail, but the crowd's response to it. In the morning, they throw men to the lions and the bears. At noon, they throw them to the spectators. The crowd shouts for killing. When one fighter is wounded, but still standing, they shout, "Kill him, lash him, burn him." When another hesitates to strike, they abuse him for cowardice. When both fall dead, they call for fresh victims to fill the intermission before the trained gladiators return. Seneca, sitting there, watching, feels the shift. He does not describe it as a temptation resisted. He describes it as a contamination absorbed. He notices in himself, after some time, that he is following the action with interest. He notices in himself the small readiness to want the wounded man to be finished. He notices in himself the impatience with the man who hesitates. Then he writes the line that has traveled for 2,000 years. Recede into ipse quantum potes, cum his versare quite meliorem facturi sunt. Illos admitte quos tu potes facere meliores. Withdraw into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who will make you better. Welcome those whom you yourself are able to make better. This is not, notice, a counsel of misanthropy. Seneca is not telling Lucilius to hate mankind or to seclude himself entirely or to look upon others with contempt. He is telling him to be careful about the direction of influence. There are those who will raise you. Seek them. There are those whom you can raise. Serve them. But do not sit for hours in the presence of what degrades you, imagining that you are strong enough to be unaffected. You are not. He goes further. He gives a second illustration, quieter than the first. He tells Lucilius that even a single conversation with a certain kind of person can undo weeks of philosophical progress. One example of extravagance or greed does a great deal of harm. An intimate associate, if he be luxurious, weakens and softens us by degrees. A neighbor, if he be rich, arouses our covetousness. A companion, if he be slanderous, rubs off some of his rust upon us, even though we be spotless and sincere. The metaphor of rust is worth pausing on. Rust does not attack the metal all at once. Rust is patient. Rust requires only contact and time. This is Seneca's picture of moral contagion, not the dramatic seduction of a great vice, but the slow oxidation of a soul that has been left too long in the wrong atmosphere. And this diagnosis, we must remember, is offered by a man who had spent his whole adult life in the wrong atmosphere. He had served at the court of Caligula. He had been ruined and exiled by Claudius. He had tutored and then advised and then failed to restrain Nero. He knew what rust looked like. He had watched it, we may believe, upon himself. There is a passage later in the Letters, in the 83rd, where Seneca examines his day at its close. He asks himself what fault he has corrected, what weakness he has resisted, in what respect he is better. This practice, the evening examination, is not unique to Seneca, but he gives it a particular urgency. If character is being shaped every hour by everything one encounters, then the day cannot be allowed to pass unexamined. One must catch the contamination early, before it settles. We may imagine Seneca at his villa in the last years of his life, doing precisely this. The court has withdrawn. The emperor no longer summons him. He has time now, for the first time in decades, to be alone with what he has become. The letters to Lucilius, we sometimes forget, are not addressed only to Lucilius. They are addressed also to the philosopher himself, who is trying, in the little time remaining, to remove some of the rust. In the year 65, 3 years after that period of retirement began, Seneca was accused of complicity in the Pisonian conspiracy against Nero. Whether he was in fact involved remains debated. What is not debated is that Nero, receiving the accusation, ordered him to take his own life. Seneca received the messenger calmly. He asked for tablets to update his will, and when this was refused, he turned to his friends and said that since he could not leave them what he had wished, he left them the one thing that remained, the pattern of his own life. He then, in the Stoic manner, opened his veins, and finding that death came slowly because of his age and his thin blood, took poison, and then finally was carried into a heated bath, where the vapors finished what the wounds had begun. Tacitus records the scene. It is one of the more famous deaths in Roman literature. What concerns us here is not its heroism, which has been sufficiently praised, but its consistency. The man who wrote that we are shaped by what surrounds us and that we must therefore be careful of our company, died in the company of philosophers and friends whom he had chosen deliberately for that hour. He had, at the last, arranged the atmosphere. Now let us come to what Seneca is actually teaching. He is teaching first that the self is porous. This is a hard doctrine, and modern ears may resist it because we are accustomed to think of character as something interior, something one has, something one carries into situations without being changed by them. Seneca denies this. Character, in his view, is not a possession, but a practice, and practices are conducted in environments, and environments alter the practitioner. There is no character that stands apart from its conditions. Every situation is either a school or an infection. He is teaching, second, that the primary discipline of the philosopher is not the acquisition of knowledge, but the curation of exposure. What you read, what you watch, whom you sit with, what conversations you enter, and how long you remain in them, these are not incidental to the philosophical life. These are the philosophical life. The doctrines can be learned in an afternoon. The disciplines of company require a lifetime. He is teaching, third, that pleasure is the most dangerous vector of corruption. The gladiatorial games did not present themselves to Seneca as evil. They presented themselves as diversion, a break from work, a little rest for the eyes. It is precisely because vice comes disguised as recreation that Seneca warns against it so strenuously. If it announced itself as vice, one could refuse it. It announces itself as leisure, and one accepts. He is teaching, fourth, that solitude has a specific function. It is not, for Seneca, an end in itself. He does not recommend the life of the hermit. He recommends withdrawal as a corrective, as a way of periodically returning to a self that has not been altered by the day's incursions. One goes into solitude in order to come back into society as oneself, rather than as whatever the last crowd made of one. And he is teaching, fifth, that the choice of company is a moral act with consequences equal to the choice of any explicit action. To sit for an afternoon among those who cheer for cruelty is, in the Stoic accounting, to have participated in cruelty. To spend one's evenings among the greedy is to have made oneself greedier. There is no neutral attendance. There is no innocent presence in a corrupting place. The doctrine is severe. It admits few exceptions. But notice what it does not say. It does not say that you must find perfect company, for no such company exists. It does not say that you must condemn those who are worse than you, for the philosopher, Seneca insists, receives even the flawed if he can improve them. It does not say that the world outside your door is a threat to be avoided. It says only that attention is formation, and that formation is real, and that you must therefore be a steward of your own attention with the same care that a farmer gives to his soil. The seventh letter ends with 3 quotations, each recommending, in effect, a small and careful audience. I write this not for the many, but for you. You and I are audience enough for one another. And then, from Epicurus, whom Seneca cites without embarrassment, despite belonging to a rival school, I have never wished to please the crowd. For what I know, they do not approve. What they approve, I do not know. He is not, in the end, telling Lucilius to hate the crowd. He is telling him to stop asking the crowd for its approval and to stop offering it his hours. Consider, then, this question and carry it with you when the episode ends. Where in your life do you sit at noon among the spectators, believing you are only watching? You have your own arenas. They may not be arenas of blood. They may be gatherings of gossip, or conversations of complaint, or hours of consumption, whose content you would be ashamed to defend if asked. You have entered them most likely expecting diversion. You have told yourself that you are strong enough to be unaffected. You have said, perhaps in these very words, that it is only for a little while. Seneca would ask you to notice, when you leave, what you have become. Not dramatically, not with self-accusation, only with the honest evening examination that he practiced upon himself. Are you more generous or less for the hour you have spent? More patient or less? More able to see the person in front of you as a person or less? The measurement is not difficult. The measurement is only usually avoided. And Seneca would ask you, too, to consider the other direction. Who in your life makes you better simply by being present? Whose company, when you leave it, finds you kinder than you were, or steadier, or more inclined to do the difficult thing that you had been avoiding? These persons are not decorations upon a good life. They are the substance of it. They are, in Seneca's phrase, those with whom you should associate, because they will make you better. And if the honest answer to the question is that you do not know any such persons, or that you have drifted from them, then the seventh letter is addressed to you with particular urgency. Withdraw into yourself as much as you can, he wrote, from his villa in the last years of a life he no longer wished to defend. Associate with those who will make you better. Welcome those whom you yourself are able to make better. He wrote this because he had learned it late. He wrote this because he knew, better than his readers, what a lifetime among the wrong company could do to a man who had once meant to be a philosopher. He wrote this in the hope that Lucilius, who was younger and freer and not yet ruined, might learn it in time. The letter closes. The lamp is put out. The evening examination is complete. And what the philosopher leaves you at the end is not a program, nor a system, nor a promise. It is only a question, held out in the quiet, for you to answer alone. Whose company are you keeping, and what is it making of you?